everybody, it's Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of catching up with bassist and author Alex Lofoco.
Hello. Hello, Raul. Hi, everyone.
Alex and I are gathered today because Alex has just released a new book, The Scale Color System, Visualize the Fretboard and Unlock Your Playing. And we're very excited about it, and of course, to find out more about a book, who better than to talk to the author and the person who understands it the best. So, Alex, tell us, with this book, this is volume number 1, has to deal with scales. What was your motivation to create such a book? What were you thinking?
It goes back a few years ago, actually. I developed this system, or this way of coloring intervals and scales about 9 years ago, almost 10 years ago. I developed this way for teaching to my students when I first moved here to London. Basically, after 8 years of experimenting and trying it with different people at any age, any nationality, any level, I had 100% of good feedbacks. So I was a bit skeptical at the beginning because it sounded too easy and way too simple. So I hold it on like maybe there is a catch, but actually there is no catch. And after many years of exploring it, I just decided to put it color on white because many people were really happy with it, and they all suggested and encouraged me to, why don't you write a book? Why don't you write it down? And I said, yeah, okay, so maybe this is the right time. After having a lot of drive test or road tested for many years, so I managed to sit down a few months and illustrate it and design it and write the content.
Got you.
It was a bit of an interesting actually journey, because I went through those concepts, and I think I've learned also even more while writing, because it's much easier when you have a one-to-one lesson and you explain things in a sort of a colloquial way, but when you have to write it down, you need to nail the concept in fewer words. The list is to go through the point to the point. It's been a good challenge.
Got you.
Especially because I wrote it in English, so it's not my native language.
It's a little bit of a challenge there. And the concept of establishing color patterns on the fretboard. Before we were recording, we talked a little bit about with piano keys, there's black and white, and so there's kind of a color coding and patterns there. But with the fretboard, where everything is kind of homogeneous, how did you come up with the idea to color code this?
Well, basically, I was saying, because it goes on my problem at first to learn the C major scale at the very beginning when I first started playing. And I was always getting confused what finger to use. So I found out that basically all scales, they have a sort of a intervallic pattern, which also represent the fingering pattern. Mm-hmm. And to diversify the different parts of the scale, I just applied a color. The page 12, the major scale, everybody or most of us know from the beginning the C major scale shape. And what you do with your fingers for each string is a different pattern. So I just found, well, let's say the first bit, C, D, on one string is red, mm-hmm. Then E, F, G is blue, and then A, B, C is yellow, because there are 3 different patterns. So I just diversified the pattern on the neck, mm-hmm. so that the student could remember how to go across the strings or over the neck, up and down, because the intervals are the same everywhere. With the piano, it's got to do a sort of a visual aspect, which the piano has, and the guitar and bass don't have as much. So on the piano, you can see that anything you do on one octave, on the next octave or the one behind is always the same. Mm-hmm. So it's very symmetrical. Because on the string instruments, you might have the same note repeated in different places. It's a bit deceptive. And for somebody, of course, if you know it, it's not a problem. But if you approach the matter, I remember I was struggling to understand the geography of the neck. But it is actually even more symmetrical than the piano, because literally to play whatever scale in whatever key, you just move your hand shape, mm-hmm. and it sounds the same half a step up. While on the piano, to play a C major scale or a C sharp, or when you have many alterations on the piano, is a bit different. It's not as hard. It's not a transposing instrument. So I try to work try to bridge, basically that's the idea, to bridge the theory of the scales and the practice on the instrument. So with the colors, I found that you can remember the intervals and the fingering and play on the instrument all at once. Just to make it quick, to learn all these boring concepts about scales and positions, and then start playing and enjoying more. So you don't have to remember too much, but you internalize. Because you can see the following page, on page 13, you can take the same red, blue, and yellow pattern colors and then move them along on the neck. And what you're doing here is the same thing, but you can just shift them around. So you can extend and expand the scale all over the neck. And then once you can do the C major scale in just one octave, you can see how the same pattern develops all over the fretboard at the end of page 13. I mean, when I started visualizing scales on the neck, for me, they were all gray because I'm also half colorblind. So, I mean, I understand red, blue, and yellow, if they're really clear. But for me, they were all kind of grayish. It was more like a Tetris or Lego type of blocks.
Sure.
Because, you have this interval, one tone, and then half a step after it. So everything was clicking and getting together, more like probably a Lego block. And you move them around. With
this, it's fascinating because it kind of bridges or it approaches, by probably a better description, with some of the modal concept. And it applies to kind of grabbing this because, again, they are established on page 18 with starting with the Ionian and kind of working its way through. I'd been mentioning that when I was learning, for me the modal was just a hand exercise basically, which I was starting on the Ionian, but the whole purpose was just to work both right and left hand, and I wasn't grasping how it played into anything, or how it had any kind of practical application. But I see that you've addressed it here with this concept.
Yeah, if you see on page 16, for instance, that's where I introduced the modes. I mean, the way I see notes, they're never ending, I mean, normally on the exercises, you see just one octave. Mm-hmm. And the modes, they are often presented as one octave scale with no continuation. But on page 16, you can see that I just put the notes here. And it is the same note series. And each mode, it is basically a little sample of the same sequence. Mm-hmm. So that's why they move alongside. So once you translate that into colors, of course, you have all the other combination. But then, even to memorize the colors for the major scale modes, like on page 27, mm-hmm. you see that all 7 modes, they are just 7 combinations of the same 3 colors, like a red, blue, and yellow.
Yes.
Or you also have the stretch position, extended position, 2 tones, 2 whole steps, which becomes a green block. So basically the idea of coding intervals is just a way I found working with my students to remember and shape the fretboard. So you have more. It's got to do with where Alan Allsworth also showed some scale charts on his video he did in 92. He was showing the 10 most usable scales he was using. He wasn't calling them major, minor, harmonic, or melodic. He was giving them his own symbols or signs he was using. I mean, I recommend you to check it out and see also his approach, because he started learning music through scales and permutation of notes, and then that's how he ended up having any type of scale. And this kind of color system kind of cracks that, because you have, all the dots on the fretboard, mm-hmm. but then it's not as, for me at least, it's not as clear to see how the pattern repeats itself. But if you have the color code, you basically see that it's like a pattern, like a decoration. And you see that all the colors, they just repeat themselves in this and that pattern. And when you go along, you can start thinking about the colors to remember and even discover the notes. Because if you don't know the notes with the colors, like if you practice C major scale, the all red bit is C, D, all the blue is E, F, G, and all the yellows is A, B, C. Mm-hmm. So wherever you go, you actually go and find out the notes on the fretboard. And it's a sort of a as we were saying earlier, you can go through the book or this method on your own, so like an IKEA instructional manual, mm-hmm. because it just tells you where the notes are and gives you a different perspective and different positions, how to get the same notes. Since the frets or since the strings are set on the instrument, you have the notes. Then if you don't know where they are, you can start studying them. If you have to study them by memory, the only problem I found is that memory is faulty, and if you don't use them, you can kind of forget.
Yeah.
If you realize where they are and how the pattern works, basically, then from the practice you can go and justify the theory, because that's my point. Like, theory justifies the practice.
Sure.
So you should do both things at the same time, as opposed to study the theory first and then try the practice. You should practice something and then see if it follows what rule, and then basically you have it to work it out yourself. I think that's how I did it, or like many musicians, all from Jimi Hendrix, Alan Allsworth, Charlie Parker, they were all self-taught. They didn't go to school and learn something. So, like I say in the preface, learning the craft by ear, practicing with passion and dedication, and sometimes obsession, and trial and error. That's how we all learn. And then you create your own rule. That's what I suggest you to do anyway. So.
Got you. Well, I can certainly see where it would be a very helpful approach for somebody who is working on self-education. I also see it as a very good tool. And I like to use the word tool in this sense, put into use by educators, because it's very common nowadays. Because bassists, there are many who they wear multiple hats, because they'll teach, they're hoping to play. If they're playing full time, they're thrilled. But I can't tell you how many I know who also have students and could utilize something like this as they look at it and as they grasp it and they go, well, this could be very useful to help me explain this concept to my students. And then they in turn can kind of serve as a guide through this journey, like you are with your own students, as you take them through it and you explain it to them. Having somebody that could kind of talk you through some of this would be another approach. And so I'd almost wonder whether it could be reverse engineered. If a student gets a hold of this and takes it to their teacher and says, I want you to look at this. I think this is going to help me understand some of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have actually some people, some customers, they bought the book. They're using it with the students already, because I published it. It came out in August, and I managed to sell many in last month, and they're already using it with success. I mean, again, you need to want to play, and then there are many ways. I found that this one here is a bit more immediate because it's visual, and it makes sense as a visual thing. So obviously each teacher have got their own system and their own way, which probably has got to do with how they learn in the first place. Definitely it's a unique method, I have to say, because there is nothing like that around for any instrument. The fact that it's very visual might feel a bit awkward or a bit like a shortcut. It's not, because if you remember the color, even if you think of the formula for the color scale, if you're playing, you ain't got time to think of that. So you need to know exactly where you're going and how. It's like when reading, there are certain things that you can't read just because the piece is not meant to be read, like an improvisational or a solo. Sure. So if you want to achieve a certain level of proficiency, you need to have digested it. Another approach is, some people might not be happy about the color because, again, it's a shortcut and you should be able to read music. And that's fine. You have to be able to read if you want to read and if you need to read, of course. And this doesn't take away anything from any other method. Perhaps one thing that took me away from writing it straight away after I thought of this method was also that I didn't want it to be misunderstood, because, again, it really helped me a lot in my teaching. I remember the first time I applied to a brand new student, because with few students in London I developed it with, basically, so I was trying it every day. With a brand new student who had little knowledge of notes on the instrument at all. I mean, he could play and he had a band and jamming, in the garage and stuff. But after 1.5 hours explaining him scales with this color system, he could manage to play all over the neck all the major scale modes in any key from the bottom to the top note without problems, because he could visualize the intervals this way. And then he had to go back home, sit down and practice and learn the notes on the neck, which is something that you have to do anyway. The same thing as for reading.
Sure.
But yeah, I do agree. I mean, I would like to have more feedbacks from some other tutors or teachers to see if they can complement their teaching with this other method or this other system, really. That's why at the beginning of the book I introduce a bit of theory, or try to clarify some theory concepts such as notes, intervals, scales, so that along the book we basically speak the same language. So if I talk about an arpeggio, an interval, or what's a minor or major third or whatever,
sure,
you have a reference. And the same for the glossary. That's another big part, or something I really think is important as definitions, because that's probably the most of the problems I found when I have to discuss with students or other teachers as well. But mainly when a student has got a question, then you understand that the problem is the definitions. When I don't like to talk too much about minor 7, major 7, diminished, or make too many nomenclatures.
Sure.
I mean, it is what it is because it sounds as it sounds, and then you can call it whatever. And in this, I must agree with Alan Oswald again, quoting him. He was saying, I don't know how you call that scale, I know how it sounds, and if you can play, if you play it, I know it.
Yeah.
I just don't call it the same way, because then eventually when you play a gig, still quoting Alan, you don't call the changes to the audience. E flat major 7, and you start improvising on that chord. You just play.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how you call it and how you to achieve it. How you achieve that is more about understanding and having good time, basically. So the idea of the book behind it is to make it quick to enjoy as much as possible, really, and enjoy and explore the instrument in a progressive way. So the more you can do, the more you want to do, as opposed to be stuck in remembering where was this note or how I have to put my finger.
Sure.
So the colors basically synthesize a bit of everything. And the same will be on the second volume. I'm already started writing about the intervals, arpeggios and chords.
Okay.
Because the scales is the scales is basically the organizations. It's the organization of the notes. Then from there you have a subset and you make whatever arpeggios and chord. And then you have harmony. I wanted to start with the scale first, because then you put all the dots. Then you put all the dots together, and then you make music, hopefully.
Got you. So by the time you're said and done, you estimate you'll have 3 volumes?
Yeah. There's going to be the scales at first, arpeggios and chords, and mechanics and techniques, which is probably a backward approach. I would normally, when I teach, I start with the mechanics and techniques to play the instrument in a sort of wax on, wax off fashion. So to teach some apparently meaningless movements or mechanical movements, but then certain combinations of movements, they actually correspond to some specific arpeggios or scales or anything. But to train, I think the technique, which is what I call mechanics, so the pure movements on the strings with whatever hand, I think is the most crucial aspect, because if you can't move your fingers mechanically, it's really hard to do what you would like to do. Then once you can do a movement, then you can organize it, giving it a name and a scale and a structure, just to remember and organize it, because then you can put together these 2 elements with what you want how it to sound. Because you have a sound in mind already, or at least you should. But then in order to have that, you should develop the right technique to do it. And to make it clear, organize it with this theory thing.
Well, I find it fascinating, and I'm thrilled to see evolution in education, because I think my comparison, music is a language. Linguistically, we learn how to speak before we learn the theory behind speaking. We aren't taught grammar as babies. We're taught practical applications. And
Yeah, absolutely.
there's repetition. There is you want to get straight to being able to express yourself. And as you make mistakes, the people around you will say, well, no, that's not how you say it, or that's not how you do it. It's not until we grow to elementary school or something that they start trying to do the hardcore grammar and theory. And my weakness, spelling. I mean, it's especially with English. It's such a terrible language when it comes to spelling.
It has a lot of nonsense.
Yes, things don't.
Why do you write it that way?
They don't make any sense. Whereas with Romance languages like Spanish and Italian, things they're very phonetic, and there's less exceptions. Why this means this or why this means this? It's like, no, this always is this way. And I find with music, as I speak to so many performers, there's kind of a split between the ones that just wanted to play. So they got in their band and they hit the club and they've been playing. And if they were fortunate, they would hit a successful band. Right now on our cover, David Ellefson did exactly that. He left Minnesota and went to LA and hit the club scene. And Megadeth happened and everything is just going. But he still is working on theory, because he felt like he kind of coming back to the linguistic side. He's like, okay, I have good domain of this, but I want to look into the details and I want to work a little more about that. And then you have the others that take, I call it the old-fashioned approach, that is more
which is more conservatoristic, maybe, or
exactly, which can be so daunting. I myself, when I started on the accordion. I have a very good ear. So basically my teacher would play something. I'd memorize what she played and act like I was looking at the music and play back what she had just done.
You did it by ear. Yeah, I know. I had the same thing too. But yeah, so for Dave, we'll make sure we send him a book then. So that will help him.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, I think that's how everyone started playing, really, because you want to play.
Exactly.
And then, obviously, because you love playing, I mean, that's how it worked for me anyway. And possibly, you start to play, you love it so much, but then you start feeling that you want to know more. So that's why you delve into the education, and then you go to find a guitar teacher, and then you buy books, and you start watching DVDs, or VHS actually, when I first started, instructional videos, because you want to know more. But yeah, the bottom line is that you want to play. You should be able to play and enjoy it. Or if you don't play professionally and you like the instrument and the love of music, enjoying the process of learning in a comprehensive and... So yeah, but I think also in the educational system, the world has changed a lot dramatically in the last 10 years, I feel.
Yes.
Anyway, so I think also in the education, there is a different demand, and kids are different than they have different resources. They're not different, they're not better, they're not worse. But it just they can access nowadays, we can access much more than I could ever thought or could ever desire when I was 17, when I first started playing bass.
Sure.
So that's maybe is a plus in a way, because you have a lot of information that's available. But the minus I find is that there is no order. So you skip from one thing to the other, and you want to do double thumping slap before knowing what a pentatonic scale is, because you can follow so much. When I was a kid, I really had, honestly, few cassettes of few bands, and I wanted to play that. I just played the cassette over and over, and that was the only way I had to learn, and tried. I'm not saying it's the best way. It was the best for me then, but try to get the best out of one little thing, as opposed to get little from many things, because then that's where I think there is a risk, not for everyone, I'm sure, that you create a lot of confusion, because everyone has got a different way to say the same thing.
Sure.
So this is one song, whatever it is, or this is one sound, and I can say one thing. I can say the color. You can say the major 7, sharp 11, whatever. Alan Oswald says another thing, and another guy says another thing. Another guy says the tab. And because I would like to learn, I don't know where to start. And I have so many inputs and so many things. So I think it's harder in a way nowadays, I feel, to discern and to have one coherent path. Whatever it is, right or wrong, there is no right or wrong, because ultimately that's how it should sound. If it sounds that way, it's good, no matter how you get there. If it doesn't sound good, doesn't sound good. And maybe work it out, or work harder on it, or find a different approach. So find a different angle or perception. So I'm really open to any type of education and approaches, because that was my dissertation on my degree was about the language, music, and the brain.
Okay.
And that's why I was thinking when you were talking about we learn language and we speak language before knowing any theory behind it.
Exactly.
And that's actually how it works. It should work with music. I mean, when a toddler or when a child bubbles, they're actually making practice. They are practicing the mouth, the sounds, how to make sounds. Then they start putting words together. But then I found, or as much as I can remember, I think I've learned pretty much 95% of the words I know. I've learned them by my own. I mean, the meaning and how to use them, you cannot assume how to say something. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you get your parents correcting you, but most of it is imitation.
Yes.
And then from imitating or from repeating something, then you kind of assume the meaning of the words. And then the rule behind it. Then obviously you go to school and they tell you what a verb, a noun, pronoun, or adjective. But I think the meaning, like what this note or what this word or what this sound means to me, is a very personal thing. Mm-hmm. Choice of notes, choice of words. We express ourselves through different, choosing different words just because we are more used to it, mm-hmm. because we like it, or we think that word means something. The same for notes. Whatever extension you use on a chord, or whatever passing note you want to use to go from one bit to the other, is very personal because we attach a meaning to this sound or the other. So ultimately, it's up to us, or it's up to you, to learning your own learning path. That's why I wanted to keep it very... There are no exercises in the book, going back to the scale color system, just because I think knowing the scale all over the neck is already a big exercise. Mm-hmm. Because once you know where the notes are, like, again, putting Alan Oswald, just like think about like dancing on the notes you want to play, and then forget whether your hands can do it or not. Just try it. Yeah. So if you know the path that you know where, then you have it, basically. Because once you know where to go and how it sounds, what to say and how to say it, pretty much saw it. Then you develop the technique needed for what you need to do.
Well, Alex, this is so exciting. And I know people seeing this, if they want to get a copy of the scale color system, where's the best place to look?
At the moment, it's available on my website. So on alexlofoco.com, mm-hmm. in the shop section, there is the book, which is for $24, actually, plus shipping. And I'm waiting for the new run. So probably from next week, so from, let's say, late September onwards, it's going to be available. Yes, there is also a Facebook page I opened for the book, which is called facebook.com/color scale color system. Color is in the British English, so COLOUR.
Yes.
Which is, but also because I'm using this primer color, red, blue, and yellow, so I needed 6 letters more than 5.
Yes. Very cool.
And yes, and there will be some little gadgets more, like a poster as well. Mm-hmm. You can put on your wall with the stickers, so you can basically make up your scale in a sort of analog way and use it as a exercise board, which synthesizes a bit of the positions and everything. And if you get it, please send me your feedbacks and check out the bibliography, because I checked out some really interesting books from 17th century also. Well, I did a bit of research, of course, so I included the bibliography to understand also where this triad come from and how the music was conceived at the root. So I took it more like a little bit academic book, more than also a manual or technical method.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us about the
scale
color system. Folks, make sure you check this out. Go to www.alexlofoco.com. And there you go, the lovely cover there. Learn more about the language that we share, music, and on our instrument, the bass. We've been bringing this to you live on Bass Musician Magazine.